Russia's assessment of the unrest in Syria is that it's mainly being provoked by an armed opposition. Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov also says it's time to stop dealing in ultimatums and get back to peace talks. A UN investigation earlier found that Syrian forces committed crimes against humanity, brutally dealing with anti-government demonstrators. Almost 4,000 people have been killed after months of unrest. The EU is tightening the economic screws on the Syrian regime and mulling an arms embargo, something Moscow strongly opposes. Let's get a perspective from neighboring Lebanon. Dr. Jamal Wakim, a political analyst and professor at Lebanese International University, joining us now. Do you think further sanctions can have any impact on ending this violence?
I don't think so. This violence is instigated by foreign powers. Of course, there is a complaint about the regime in Syria by local forces. However, the people involved in armed insurrection against the regime are financed and supported by mainly the US and by its allies. The reason for this is that they want to topple the regime in order to align Syria to the American camp totally in the bigger American strategy to contain the rising Russian and Chinese power. They don't want for Russia or China to get access to the Mediterranean or to get access to the Indian Ocean. That's why they were involved in a regime change throughout the Arab Islamic world in order to hand over power to the Muslim Brothers, and Syria became the only exception. That's why toppling the Ba'ath regime in Syria, a secular regime, would enable the United States to install the Muslim Brothers in power in Syria, so that we will have a Middle East ruled by the Muslim Brothers on one hand and directed against the Russian power and the Russian superpower and the Chinese superpower. This is how we can understand things.
You seem to be dismissing outright the reports that have been confirmed by the UN of the crackdowns, the brutal crackdowns on protesters against the Assad regime. Often we've been hearing words every week, every day about the tens of killed, dozens have been killed. I mean, you're saying it's not happening?
No, I'm not saying this is not happening. I'm saying that the regime, there are several dimensions for this crisis. One of them is the corruption of the regime, the authoritarian character of this regime, but the main opposition, the armed opposition to the regime, we have to differentiate between the armed opposition and the peaceful opposition. We have a peaceful opposition to the regime that is calling for reforms, and we have an armed insurrection supported by neighboring Turkey, supported by some Arab countries like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, and they want a regime change in order to make it possible for the Muslim Brothers to take over power, so that we will have a whole region stretching from the shores of the Persian Gulf to the shores of the Atlantic Ocean, all ruled by a neo-Ottoman, quote-unquote, Muslim Brotherhood, or Turkey will be playing a leading role in this sense, and this role is directed to block Russian access to the Mediterranean, and this is how we can understand the Russian attitude.
Sorry to jump in here, but the need to keep this moving on. Russia's foreign minister is drawing parallels with the situation in Libya, where the West armed the rebels against the UN arms embargo. Do you think that the same pattern is emerging here in Syria?
Definitely, there are attempts to create, let's say, a protected area for the armed opposition to direct its campaign against the regime. They want to recreate the Libyan scenario, but this time I think that both Russia and China were aware of this fact. That's why they opposed such an action. That's why the Russians were so firm on opposing any foreign intervention in Syrian affairs. And this is the reason why the Arab League's resolution to obstruct any participation of the Syrian delegation in the Arab League's conferences and so on were meant to be a first attempt towards internationalizing the crisis, had it not been blocked by China and by Russia.
All right, we have to leave it there. Dr. Jamal Wakim, political analyst and professor at Lebanese International University in Beirut. Thanks for your time.